Friday, the 17th of April, year of our Lord 2020. You're on Capitol Hill, right across the street from the Supreme Court. Another beautiful spring day that nobody's enjoying because everybody's inside. We're one of the new hotspots here in the Baltimore, Maryland, Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C., the next new hotspot. Live on the John Fredericks Radio Network, America's Voice.News, which is Dish Channel 219, Newsmax TV, FM 99.1, 103.9 in Chicago. The reason that we can even open and everything like that is the fact that we've got these therapeutics. And therapeutics is part of this concept of mass on point. Therapeutics being one, surveillance testing being the other, and these tracking, and the last being antibodies. That three, with the sequestering of vulnerable groups, gives you a methodology to kind of to think about how you get out of this. The therapeutics has been so politicized. The discussion of the business has been so politicized. Walk us through, because the market's up today, and one of the reasons the market's up, people are talking about these drugs.
Yeah. By the way, I have my papers here. Since you want to.
Proof for the audience. You took that personally.
Well, you never know what's going to get the audience hyped up. And one of the things that is, by the way, is somebody saying, appreciate the show. You're picking every message apart. I'm a common man. I understood the charts just fine in the three phrases. Your critiques sound like it depends on what the meaning of is. So I thought we might explain why particularly we're going through this, in definitional terms.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd say right to that point, look, our listener is exactly spot on. And that's actually the question we want people to raise, because if you have, look, we take these protests in Michigan very seriously. We know that people in Wisconsin are just as frustrated. We know same thing in Illinois. When these states start opening at different times, and in one state you can go to a restaurant or a bar, in the next state you can go to work, or in the next state you can visit a loved one in a rest home, but not in one of the others, people are going to have the questions. Well, wait a minute. Why just across the state they're saying this 5 miles away, but I can't do it here? This is why we're bringing it up, because when you have the decentralized federalist approach, and it's up to these governors. Again, we look at how blue state governors are reacting to a lot of this. We'll look how red state governors. They're going to make different decisions based on seemingly similar data. And
I think the definition of is important with this.
Yeah.
Here's why. Because in going through all that and deconstructing it, you get to the punchline. The punchline, it's Memorial Day. The punchline is, if you do, and I hope the president and people today start to lay out a timeline and actually do a chart that's a timeline. If you go through this, which is a good presentation, but you distill it down to what they're actually trying to get across, you realize it's a fairly aggressive push to the states that, hey, you're going to do it. You're the management group. You got to get it down to the execution groups at the deck plates. But here's how you do it, right? And this is what the timeline is. Basically, by Memorial Day, subject to the tri-state area, New Orleans, and a couple of others, get ready to go.
Well, I think if they can ramp up the testing, then they give the tools to the individual states to make an analysis of the numbers in their state, make a risk-reward analysis, and decide whether or not they're going to open up.
Okay, before we get to the therapeutics, why this is frustration? What is the hang-up with the mass testing? Why they're saying that a good benchmark would be 3 million a day, and they say they could do that, they think, by September 1st. This is what they're trying to talk about. Why do we not have, given we've had the time now and you've got the labs, you have the commercial, you're not dealing with the CDC. You now have entrepreneurs, these big drug companies in the private, the capitalist system doing it. Why is there still a controversy about the mass testing today?
Well, you're seeing some of these private testing companies who are saying that they were a little bit behind the curve last week. Now they have more tests than they're actually doing tests every day. It's not so much it's not so much that we can't do testing. It's that in a lot of places, like particularly the hot spots, they're not giving tests. It's not sick or is not a healthcare worker. Now, Abbott Labs came out with that pretty cool little test that you put in the box in your GP's office, and that is apparently ramping up more and more.
But I've heard overnight, there's another couple of people, because I'm bombarded all day long.
Right.
I heard that the Abbott Labs box is like, it in itself may be a problem. That's one of the gating events on the Abbott Labs.
Right, they're having a lot of the people who have had them in the past haven't really been using them, so there's a little learning curve.
Yes.
Getting people back on speed. But I do think that the testing is key. but I don't know that it's going to be the total answer, right? I think that we're going to watch this thing play out. I think it's going to decrease as we go into the summer.
But the part of the testing, it gets you to the contact tracing. If you have the infrastructure, and there's going to be a huge controversy about, do I do it online? Is it going to be in my phone? I don't want to have a chip in my head, right? Versus some guy with a clipboard knocking on my door. I do think the interim thing is flip right now the census workers, flip them over, the ones that want to do it, right? And train them up and make those guys, or some aspect, so you can sit there and go, hey, Massachusetts just hired 1,000, but say, hey, if you need 300,000, if that's the benchmark, I can get you 300,000.
We can even hire all of Bloomberg's former field workers.
Exactly.
Right? Because he laid them all off. They don't have anything to do right now.
You know, I think one of the things with the contact tracing, we've gone beyond where contact tracing is really going to be effective now because it's out there so much. So I think that the talk about the contact tracing is a little bit like putting the horse behind the cart, you know?
Right, but but it will be important because as we go and get this thing beat down, and then we have this at some point in the future here, when there is some kind of second wave, when this pops back up in the future, we will need that for this next go-round.
I agree.
But for right now, you're 100% spot on.
Okay, now give us the update on the therapeutics. We're across the board because the reason you've got better numbers in Florida, the reason you have fewer doctors and nurses dead in New York City, the reason that Seattle in that area all came out, you're going to have the reason in Detroit, nobody's talking about this.
San Francisco.
When it all comes out at the end of the day, the central thing besides the bravery and courage of first responders and the doctor nurses teams is the fact that on a doctor-patient basis, people made decisions right at the moment of decision, right, to use these therapeutics, and the therapeutics is what's got us do.
Listen, I mean, I have total respect for these first responders and doctors. I mean, imagine going into work every day thinking that you're putting your life on the line and you can't even see the enemy, right? So big props to them. Big story out this morning was the release of a portion of a video call between doctors at University of Chicago discussing a program that they've been doing with, and I'm going to pronounce it incorrectly, remdesivir, a product by Gilead Science that was originally created to fight the Ebola virus. Now, it wasn't that effective with Ebola, but we found that it's very effective with COVID-19. The very first time that we used it was the patient zero for the U.S., basically, or the first guy came back from China. He was dying in a Seattle hospital. They gave him the red Demise as a compassionate use. And this is what they were doing for the first month and a half of this. And it was very inefficient. And you could only get the drug when you were basically on your deathbed. So that guy survived. And they've been doing various studies. A big one at University of Chicago that's been in the press today. They had 125 patients, and 113 of them were in severe condition. I mean, ICU type condition.
This is critical, right? These were ones that they were 1 foot away from the grave.
Right, and most of the patients have been released from the hospital, and only 2 of them have died. This is a game changer. Now, of course, they're saying, hey, well, it's all anecdotal because we didn't do a double-blind test. Well, you know, I'd be pretty upset if I was the guy getting a placebo in a death-defying disease pandemic. But we're seeing this across the country. My understanding is that at the Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, they are using the hydroxychloroquine. My understanding from several things I've read and a doctor I spoke to in Florida, they are using it extensively in the old age homes. There are studies going on across the country to use it as a prophylactic amongst healthcare workers, particularly in Chicago, Detroit. They've got another study, I think, out in Seattle along the same lines.
My anecdotal evidence of people that are contacting me nonstop from New York are that it's a big deal with the doctors.
I have a friend whose aunt was double pneumonia, and she was released from the hospital in 4 days after starting the
I'm also saying it's a prophylactic for the doctors and nurses.
Gosh, yes. They're using it across India. Every doctor in India is using it as a prophylactic.
That's 2. You got the Gilead, you got the remdesivir, you've got the hydroxychloroquine.
And then there's one more, which is very interesting. It's a drug called ivermectin. Ivermectin has been around forever. The UN considers it one of the 10 drugs necessary for the world. It is an antiparasitic. It's essentially an oral pesticide that does no damage to the human body. but it kills the bugs that might live in you, the sort of little worms, things like that. But they're finding out that giving this to people with the COVID-19 has a very repressive effect on the virus itself. They were finding that some people were eliminating the virus from their body in 24 to 48 hours with one dosage of this stuff. Now, it's pretty restricted in terms of its prescription in the United States, and my understanding about this is I've taken this before. Tropical diseases are my specialty. And apparently it was put under restriction during the AIDS epidemic because people were suffering these parasitic diseases that they were not able to solve with regular medication because of the compromise of their systems with the AIDS. So it was put on a CDC monitoring, and a dosage I tried to get it was $270. Now, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but I just went down to the feed store and got the same drug that they use for horses at about $2 a tube.
Remember, Jack, we don't endorse any of this. I want to make sure
I
all the
am not
laws,
a
all the laws-
doctor. I am not a
War Room
doctor.
Pandemic does not provide medical advice.
we don't sell any of this stuff, but also
And we're not employees of War Room Pandemic.
exactly. But we are starting a newsletter on Monday that has
Right. We'll be like Newsmax.
Move it. I knew you were going to go there. I didn't say that, Chris Ruddy. Okay. Also, Japan. Talk to me about Abe. Abe's got his own thing he's pushing.
Abe's got this drug from Fujifilms called Avilan. Avilan is a
Avigan.
Avigan. Forgive me. I'm very bad at pronouncing these drug names. Avigan's been around for 35 years or so. It was used extensively in Japan, kind of as a proxy for Tamiflu, which we now find out doesn't work. But it was being used for influenza patients over time, and they started using it on some COVID-19 patients. They had some success. There have been some other countries in Southeast Asia that have followed Japan's lead. Indonesia and Malaysia, I think, took big deliveries from Fujifilms of the drug.
Here's the bottom line. It's between you and your doctor, but there's a lot of things out there that are brewing, and you can see with the pharmaceuticals and the capitalist system, people are motivated to do this. There'll be one thing I can tell you, there'll be others popping up as we go along. You should get with your doctor, but there's these things out there that obviously in dire situations, right? Like in Chicago, right, which is this study where only 2 died that were all in severe shape, and it's at University of Chicago, which is not it's some down in some place you've never heard of, right?
And the key thing is, and you're seeing this across the board, early intervention is key. I mean, you have to think about these antivirals as a bridging device, almost like the ventilator, right? It helps you catch up, help your immune system catch up and defeat the disease in partnership with the drug. But once you get too far down, it's very hard to bring people back.
Okay, we've got today. You're going to have Governor Cuomo is going to have his daily report. Then at noon, is it noon?
Noon Central, so 1
noon
Eastern.
Central time, 1 o'clock. You're going to have Governor Abbott come up. We're going to have I tell you what, let's wait because we've got plenty of time. We're going to come back. Raheem's going to give us a wrap up of the world, right, to put this in perspective. I also want to talk about the World Health Organization. We have to get to that. Your analysis of this. We've got Lou Dobbs. We've got everything about China. We're going to have Miss Cortes on here later talking about her analysis of Joe Biden and his relationship with China. All of that's to come. Hashtag War Room Pandemic. We want to hear your observations. If you see news that we don't see, things you want us to talk about, that's what we want to get up here. Okay. Also, you can go to @WarRoom2020, @WarRoomPandemic. Thank you, Jack Dorsey. Also, 30 days to save America. We're still on this. If you're going to be shut down, you should hammer it. You don't want to slow the spread. You want to crush the spread. Okay, we're going to return in just a second. To Capitol Hill, the United States of the Federal Reserve. War Room Pandemic. We'll be back in a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. Okay, now let's pivot. We're going to get to the war with China here in a moment, but we want to set the table by talking about where we are in the world, Mr. Raheem Kassam.
Well, so we started off the first hour today by talking about the numbers that are being added on to the U.S. Death toll, causing this spike of up to 4,500. Remember, way out of line with any of the modeling. This just goes to show that actually, you can have all the best models in the world, even though you probably don't, but you can have all the best models in the world. But when you get to things like this, which is backdating information that either you weren't able to get together at the time. There wasn't the testing. There wasn't the mindedness amongst authorities to bring all of this up at the time. Spain is now doing the very same thing, and we're seeing massive increases, up to 50% increases in the death rates on some of the previous days in Spain. Even recent days in Spain are being revised up slightly, up to 10% in some cases in some of the regions. That they're trying to do is unify across the country, from all the different regions of the country, the methodology by which they report these things. The United Kingdom also doing something similar. There have been 21 dates now going backwards where the UK has had to revise the numbers. April the 15th, for instance, was revised up from 151 deaths to 471. April the 14th up from 427 to 536. And April the 13th up from 399 to 521. Those are just a couple of the examples that I picked up from the Associated Press data reporter this morning. There are other stories coming out around the world this morning, also in Germany, in the Saxony region. People will know either Chemnitz or Dresden or Leipzig as the cities there. Masks are being made mandatory in public in Saxony. In Brazil, Captain Bolsonaro has fired the health minister now, finally, after weeks of back and forth between the two. The health minister alleging that Bolsonaro not taking this seriously enough. His political opponents, with a big interview in the Guardian newspaper this morning, effectively saying that Bolsonaro will have a lot of blood on his hands after this. But of course, Jack, as you've pointed out, some of the measures that Bolsonaro has taken have kept food on the table for the world's economy, allowing the abattoirs to stay open and the meat to be processed and sent abroad. So there's, two sides to the coin on all of these stories. And the French general death toll, I think, was an interesting number, because we sort of discussed this yesterday. I can't remember if it was on air or off air, Jack. But the general death toll number is up 25% from 2019 and up 12% from 2018. So that's something to reflect. Go ahead.
No, because I want to reflect. In France, you've got, how many are dying? What are they actually doing? And Macron, my favorite, right? Yes, he gives a major interview in the Financial Times, and what does he focus on? The EU, right? He focuses on the thing. The whole interview is really, the focus is on the EU. Can they survive this? Is there going to be more populism and nationalism? I keep saying Macron is he is a nationalist, but the capital of his nation is not Paris. The capital of his nation is Brussels, right? It's the EU. Yeah. And I think if you look at generally over the EU, when you talk about these individual things, that is actually so much more horrific than it has been. People compare the individual countries. You got to look at the EU's about the size of the United States. If you add it up, it's an actual total disaster.
It's a disaster in one of the most extreme senses of lack of leadership also. I mean, if the United States had experienced the leadership on a federal level that the European Union has experienced, there would be marches on the White House right now. But meanwhile, nobody's talking about the lack of help, assistance, communication, anything from the European Commission and its president. And just finally, I wanted to get into one of these stories that I've seen in the Guardian this morning. They've done a real teardown of Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister's time in hospital, how we got there, what happened when he was in hospital. They have sources, they say, that are reliable in terms of how he was treated. And it's interesting. They say originally, quote, "It was touch and go whether he would be put on a ventilator," end quote. So he was in pretty bad shape going into the hospital. But apparently he did not receive a CPAP machine, they're saying now. He was only treated with oxygen using a face mask. And they have a source that says actually he shouldn't have been in the ICU for as long as he was. He was taking up an ICU bed. He was taking up a ventilator that's attached to the ICU bed that he wasn't using. And there were other patients who were needing it to be used. But obviously they're saying, well, look, he's the Prime Minister. There are going to be these exceptions on these sorts of things. If he needed a ventilator, at least he's got one there being reserved for him. The really interesting part of this that I found, just quickly, was that They say when you come out of this, if you've been in the ICU, the likelihood is, it's several weeks, if not longer, of recovery. You usually leave in a wheelchair. You lose a lot of muscle mass. And The Guardian making the case that actually Boris didn't have any of those things. And perhaps because he's the Prime Minister, they treated it with an excessive abundance of caution.
But the buried lead there is when he is about the veracity of the British government. Remember, they had this huge thing. They were herd immunity at first until people really understood what the scientists were saying. Then they had a scientific revolt that said we can't do this. They changed policy. Touch and go when he got there to be on a ventilator. That's a buried lead. Come on, that how sick you got to be on the ventilator. The British government and Boris's government had done a terrible job, and this gets back to veracity. I think it's one of the reasons that President Trump, I think that's why his press briefings, no matter how long they are, every day he's out there not just giving his power moves, but he's taking incoming every day from the media. And Boris Johnson, nobody in the British government has really had to do that and done it consistently. To know that when he went in, and this tells you why the Queen had the speech to the nation the night before. They realize this guy's in bad shape, right? He goes in and he's touch and go about going on a ventilator. That is 2 orders of magnitude worse than they let the British people know.
Yeah, the British Civil Service is always good at, what do you guys call it, CYA? They're always very good at that. And of course, the decision was made somewhere that if we don't have the monarch weighing in at this point, if things get really bad down the line, people will wonder why we weren't on top of this. So that was an extraordinary measure that they decided to take in that regard. The one thing as well out of all of this is that Boris Johnson and his whole team, remember, you still have White House daily press briefings, and Downing Street has daily press briefings as well. But Downing Street's press briefings are done via Zoom video. There's no room of journalists who are able to ask tough questions of the British government at this point in time. They're pre-screened on Zoom, and they just bat them away, and they do it every day at noon. There is very little in terms of transparency coming out here. Having said that, when you've got Keir Starmer, who's now the leader of the following last week's election results within the Labour Party for its new leader.
But I said that 6 months ago, and Raheem laughed at me.
I did.
Just saying.
I did laugh at you.
There's another Bannon called shot. You laughed at me. By the way, all my guys in England, UK, dismissed me when I said that.
I did because, and I think we'll see why it was a laughable thing, because Keir Starmer is not going to get any cut through this. So despite the fact that the government's mishandled, okay, we'll see. Okay. Despite the fact that the government's, listen, Mr. Cruz, okay, let's not go down that road. Despite the government's
that was client services, trust me.
Despite the government's mishandling of this in Britain, there is no opposition. There is no political will against them at the moment. I think the Guardian's reporting on this, a seven bylined report is a reflection of that.
No, but here's what
the Guardian is now the opposition, not the Labour Party.
But here's why the opposition party media, the Guardian always says, this is why it's important to your life here. Remember, Brexit and the Trump revolution are inextricably linked. The populist nationalist movement in all of Europe, but particularly UK, show you the trends of where this is going. A rejection of the managed decline by the elites. Nothing could show us more of a managed decline than the situation we're in now with China, and the whole globalization thing's been ripped away. The EU thing's been ripped away. You actually see what's going on now. Here's why they're doing it, and what still gets me: the death rates in the UK are going up and surprising the authorities every day. And there's not a firestorm over there right now. And one of the reasons is, I think, the way they're managing the media, right? They're completely kind of stiff-arming the media, and the media is not stepping up. Even the Guardian. I don't think you see the Guardian. I don't think you see the BBC. I don't think you see the Times of London. You don't see people really trying to hold the government to account of exactly what is the plan, right? Because everything you've told us is kind of not, it doesn't, reality always mugs you the next day.
So as we're talking about our inner populist here, our nationalist populist tendencies here. So
says Ted Cruz's comms director.
As we were talking about during the break on the WHO for We Hide outbreaks, Sean Donnan from Bloomberg came back and said, now do the WTO. So I said, wages travel overseas.
Dude.
You like that?
Genius. In the middle of a broadcast? That's huge. What are you talking about?
WTO, wages travel overseas. Speak a little bit closer to home, however, President Trump has been getting his tweet on, just tweeted out, liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan, and then in a third tweet, liberate Virginia and save your great Second Amendment. It is under siege.
Let me see. The Democratic governors relate to states that are. Oh, I got it. So this is what you're. This is the liberation movement. The liberation movement. Oh my gosh! Now I know what the. I don't think today's press conference is going to focus on the critical path. Somehow I think it's going to focus.
On that. By the way, when we talk about,
I think we got overruled.
Yeah, when we talk about Second Amendment in Virginia, free shout out to Loudon Guns. They're very good, excellent customer service. So if you're in the Northern Virginia area.
No, and obviously they had the biggest rally I think ever. They had 50,000 people down. John Fredericks, the John Fredericks Radio Network. John Fredericks had the big Second Amendment thing. Okay, real quickly, can you get
if you use the discount code Jason Miller, what do you get?
Man, I wish I got a discount.
They a sponsor. Do a quick, just a 30-second on the World Health Organization. Your report from yesterday. We're going to get back to when we come back from the break. But tell me, what you had a report on WHO yesterday.
Well, we had the New York Times article that came out yesterday, which was an absolutely.
But it was your deconstruction of it.
It was an absolutely extraordinary piece published in the New York Times as a news report, bylined by 8 authors, talking about how the president was wrong to point the fingers at the World Health Organization, giving them every single level of cover, opinionizing, editorializing really heavily inside that type of copy that you'd expect in a news report, and saying that basically the World Health Organization can't be blamed because UN agencies are not supposed to tell in terms of countries who have done wrong or who haven't done wrong and who've done things right. But that we know that's not the case. They happily criticize the US. The UN criticized the US, Israel, but they won't criticize China.
Okay, we're going to take a short commercial break. # War Room Pandemic. We'll be back in the War Room in just a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
You may not have an interest in the war that the CCP has against the world, but it has an interest in you. We're going to get into that right now. The Chinese Communist Party is at war with its own people. It's at war with humanity, and it's at war with the United States of America. If you're sitting there at no baseball, you've had no Masters, you're going to have no Indianapolis 500, you're going to have no Churchill Downs, all the iconic institutions of American sports. You're not going to have college football, the National Football League. You're not going to have any of it. You don't have any money. You don't have a job. All this debt we're going to be paying off for decades and decades and decades. It's because of a virus that came out of, guess what, a lab in Wuhan. Tomorrow we're going to have Part 2 of Descent into Hell. Tomorrow, Part 2 is Xi's death sentence on Wuhan. And it's going to have people that directly got hit with this. It's pretty amazing. I've been working on it all week with many Chinese Americans, Chinese expatriates. You're going to hear the real voices of people that dealt with this. And we know Global Times and all the Chinese intelligence agencies that listen to the show and monitor the show. We're coming for you. We know you can't just go back and just redo the numbers, right, and think that's going to take care of it, okay? There's blood not on your hands. It's all the way up to your neck, okay? It's disgusting what you did. It's revolting how you sacrificed the Chinese people, the good, hardworking Lao Beijing, old 100 names, who are the deplorables of China, and very much like the deplorables here, hardworking people just want to get along with their lives. I heard a great analysis of our show by a very sophisticated European podcast that said, we understand what Bannon is doing. He's trying to unite the Lao Beijing with the deplorables in the United States. That's a very good take on it because we are, right? All men are brothers, right? And they're going to throw off the oppressors of the Chinese Communist Party. We have to do that. Let's go to a couple of things I want to get to. And we got a rising star. Was it Miss Cortes? It's Kingsley Cortes from the National Pulse, a great new site under the editorial charge of our one and only Raheem Bassan. She's going to be joining us here in a few minutes. But I want to play Lou Dobbs. Had Lou Dobbs and KT McFarland last night on the Lou Dobbs show. Lou Dobbs, a old warrior about old Chinahan, as I call him. And President Trump's been very influenced, and not just here recently. I'm talking about the last 20, 30, 40 years. The Lou Dobbs show has been consistent since his old days in CNN in the 80s and 90s about the threat of the Chinese Communist Party.
Because I'm of a school that believes that you do not get to choose always your enemies and the ones with which you have to deal. We have no less, there has to be every bit as much energy directed to the protection of our forces anywhere in the world, whether it's in U.S. airspace, whether it's in the Mediterranean or the U.S. Navy, in the Middle East, or it's China. in carrying out what could be a biological attack on the United States.
Yeah.
Look, I can tell you, he's a naval officer in the 7th Fleet in the South China Sea. I mean, the three things we would practice all the time are nuclear warfare, the defense of nuclear war, chemical war, and also biological war. And by far the toughest was the biological agents, biological warfare. Everybody in the military knows that. It's a known fact that drills are the most complicated because it's much more as bad as chemical warfare is. In World War I, it was horrific, the use of gas in World War I. And nuclear weapons, absolutely horrific, particularly radiation. You've seen what happened at Chernobyl. But biological weapons. And this is why this inquiry of Tom Cotton and Marco Rubio and the press, Josh Rogan, Bill Gertz, the Western press has forced this inquiry into the Chinese Communist Party and what happened in Wuhan. It's one of the reasons we're doing the special tomorrow. What happened in Wuhan and what happened around these labs. It's the CDC lab, which is a P2 lab, and the P4 lab that's gotten a lot of focus, this P4 lab, about exactly what was going on, what was the management, how much on top of it. We have said from the very first episode, there was a biological Chernobyl. And if you remember, if you watched the miniseries or read anything about Chernobyl, the communist apparatus in the Soviet Union at the time, number one, they were totally incompetent. And number two, all they cared about was protecting the apparatus. They didn't care about the people in Chernobyl. And in fact, if you watch the miniseries, the heroism of the firefighters, the steel workers that went in and tried to save the situation is absolutely heroic. They're the Lao Beijing. They're the old 100 names. They're the deplorables of Russia. They went in and saved the situation. But it's absolutely horrific. And it's going to be everything's going to come out over time. Now, it's going to come out long before the trials, and I know they hate this now because I heard from internally they hate this when I say about the Nuremberg trials, right? There's going to be Nuremberg trials, and the people in Wuhan, the citizens of Wuhan, and particularly the ones who lost their mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters, and their wives, they're going to sit as a jury to represent mankind on what the verdict is. But I kind of know what I think the verdict's going to be, but I don't want to screw up a fair trial. We believe in fair trials here in the West and throughout the world. Let's go to, while we're in this discussion, I'm going to turn it over to Raheem a second, but I want to go to, we try to be bipartisan here, and we try to stay away from the hit. Well, okay, not bipartisan, not as highly partisan as we are, because we are, you got a room full of fairly partisan people.
No, we had a Democrat on that one time.
Oh, we like that.
Yeah.
She did a good
No,
job. By the way,
great.
we try to be even-handed. We don't try to go after Biden too hard, but here's the reality. And I keep telling the Democrats this, he's the most compromised of any possible candidate you could choose. Bloomberg would only be the second. Hillary would be the third. But particularly for the Bernie bros, and we have tremendous respect for the Bernie movement and the Bernie people, particularly that 15 or 20% of the economic nationalists, the ones that didn't vote for Hillary Clinton last time, is that when you look at where the world is today and the Chinese Communist Party is at war with its people and at war with the world, you have to start weighing and measuring something not about their health care plan. You have to weigh and measure them about what they would be as a commander-in-chief. And look, I want to be brutally frank. After 4 o'clock in the afternoon, after the sundowner time, right, Joe Biden's just not on his game. In fact, I think that all the debate, if President Trump does debate him, I'm not even sure he's going to be the nominee, but if he does debate him, the debate should start at like 5 o'clock, right? You should have a 5 o'clock. No, the debate should start at 5 o'clock. You see if he's got the thing. Let's play the little clips from Joe Biden, and then I want to turn it over to Raheem for the interview.
Yeah, and poor Joe.
Kinds of things that have to be done. There's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than he called it the World War II. He had the War Production Board.
I finally got that. But you missed this, for our radio listeners and podcast listeners, Biden's like looking down at the script the whole time, right? He's actually reading that off a page. This is not something he's trying to pull back from memory.
Sanjay Gupta looks like he'd rather be in a Wuhan lab than listening to Joe Biden ramble. Here's just a super quick clip and then on to Kingsley. And one more where Joe Biden was just lost.
Look, you have entire generation of young people beginning back in 2000 when the attack occurred on 9/11 that in fact have been behind the 8 ball from the time they got out of school, whether it was high school or college. We ended up in.
Anyways, that's 2001, Joe.
Yeah, he's trying to take my Russian surfs thing for the millennials. Come on, Joe. If you're going to lift it, if your staff's going to lift it, just lift it. That's an homage. I don't mind, but just lift it.
Can we do that again? That totally, I went totally over my head. Because AOC has been saying this, millennials have been really screwed by everything the last couple of decades, and you know, the financial crash, and now this. And that comment made me uncomfortable as a millennial, thinking of all the sacrifices of the generations that came before us. But is that what is Biden trying to say there?
He's trying to say that. He's just trying to say that the millennials don't. I think he's trying to say they don't totally understand, but we'll come back.
He's trying to do a call to greatness. One of the reasons we want to have Kingsley on here. Yeah. She's a new rising star at the new hot site, National Pulse. National Pulse is back up, by the way. It turns out it was not Chinese intelligence that actually took it down on a DDoS attack. It's Raheem a little late on his bill. I didn't realize we had this much traffic. Right?
I'm still waiting for the checks to come in, so how can they go back out? Kingsley, thank you for joining us on War and Pandemic this morning. You've had a wonderful run of articles on the National Pulse website. I'm glad you're one of our writing fellows, this program that I have to train up younger or newer writers. And you had this article that really took off and caught Steve's attention to the point where I didn't even have to raise it. He asked specifically to have you on. It's called Biden Said China's Rise Isn't Our Demise. Now 23,000 Americans are dead. That was published on April the 13th, and it's now April the 17th, and 35,000 Americans are dead. But tell us a little bit about this op-ed that you found from 2011, I believe, the New York Times, written by then Vice President Joe Biden, and he goes into some detail. What looks like a PR piece that has been written by like a K Street lobbyist on behalf of the CCP. Kingsley, tell us about this.
Raheem, you're exactly right. Biden has been an appeaser and a coddler of the Chinese Communist Party for decades. And this goes back to his 2011 op-ed that he published with the New York Times. In the decade prior to his op-ed claim, from 2001 to 2011, the United States lost 2.7 million jobs to the Chinese. And that was really to the detriment of the American worker. While globalists and corporatists prospered, average blue-collar working Americans saw their wages plummet and their jobs shipped overseas to China. You know, these business execs, they were courted by cheap production costs and cheap Chinese labor, and they were encouraged by the likes of Biden to invest in Chinese growth. And that is really a shame, and it's really a mistake of Biden's. Going back to the clip that you all played of his blunders, I know on the right we sometimes have a laugh at those, but let's be clear. Biden's biggest blunder is his failure to recognize the threat the Chinese Communist Party poses to the U.S. and the world at large.
Is that, in your estimation, you've done research on this, is that a refusal to acknowledge a threat? Is it a conscious decision that you see him? Like, I can't understand how, as vice president, you can write something like this and not see that A, it might come back to haunt you one day, right? Especially if you have presidential aspirations. And B, not recognize that actually, I mean, some of the things he writes in here are totally out of step with even back then what we thought of as a normal way of thinking about a foreign adversary, right? He says, I remain convinced that a successful China can make our country more prosperous, not less. It doesn't work like that. It's never worked like that. History has taught us it doesn't work like that. We know even Hillary Clinton, Kingsley, has talked about the predatory nature of the Chinese Communist Party, and Steve has mentioned many times on this show how the adoption and really the placing on speed of the British East India Company's approach to colonizing the world, and we're now seeing that in Africa, we're now seeing it in Latin America. For you, tell me, do you think that this is a Biden being dumb, or was this a conscious attempt to enrich himself, enrich his family? And tell us a little bit about what you wrote about Hunter Biden during all this.
Yes. So I think that the reason Biden has sort of succumbed to this CCP praise is because it is in his own personal interest. Look no further than his own son, Hunter Biden, who is one of 9 members on the board of BHR Partners. And BHR Partners is largely backed by government-owned Chinese entities. And they've been particularly active when it comes to takeovers of automotive companies, for example, Hennings Automotive in Michigan. So while average Americans saw their jobs shipped overseas, whether that was automation jobs or in factories, the likes of Joe Biden and his son, they prospered and lived like kings. They made millions.
Kingsley, I want to thank you. Fantastic piece. You're one of the rising stars of this millennial generation to come up, and this is going to be a major issue for your generation. It's going to be, I think you guys are the next greatest generation going to lead us through here. Kingsley Cortes of the National Pulse. We're going to put it back up on our site today. It's absolutely a fantastic piece. It deconstructs us. And here's the amazing thing from Kingsley's piece. She reminds us once again that Biden's son has not dropped off, these boards. Listen, Teresa Heinz's stepson, I guess it was, who was Chris Heinz, I think it is, he ran for the Hills. He was the one that came forward. The smoking gun is, he said, hey, this thing is greasy. I'm out, years ago. We're going to return War Room Pandemic in just a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Emic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
As we thought we would, we've got breaking news from Governor Cuomo's press conference. What is Governor Cuomo now saying? He's a little bit shot back across President Trump's bow.
Yeah, saying the federal government should not be trying to pass the buck without passing the bucks, says Cuomo, and is on one of his slides up there, the slide entitled Stabilize the Finances, saying that the federal government should not be entrusting the reopening of America in the longer term to the governors unless they feel they get enough cash in order to handle it themselves.
So let me tell you how far outside the mainstream this whole hostage setup is. So John Healy writes in the LA Times. He's the deputy ed page editor for the LA Times. Again, LA Times. We're not talking about warroom.org or any of the right of center sites.
It's not National Pulse.
No. I mean, this is the LA Times, and John Healy writes, but this one feels like an overreach, holding out for improvements in the PPP program to make sure its loans get to all the small employees it was designed to help makes sense. Taking the PPP hostage to help other needy programs, even if then he continues, even if warranted seems like a bit of or even if needed for the funding seems like a bit of an overreach. So even the LA Times ed page is hitting this Pelosi Schumer attempt to go and lop in hospital funding and all that into PPP, which by the way,
it's also the funding of Acorn and all. It's all the community development groups. That's what they wanted, half of the 250, 125 to flow through that. Look, a legitimate concern is that people that didn't have banking relationships, right? Yeah. It seemed like banking relationships did get you, and we knew this from people we talked to. If you had an existing relationship with the bank, you went to the headline just because it was simpler to do and you had a relationship. The question of, in particularly minority communities or those parts of the city where the barbershop or those things may not have the relationship, obviously you want those to have the PPP, to have the payroll protection. It's just how you do it. But see, these two dots connect, and here's why. What Cuomo is arguing for and what the big state governors, Democratic governors principally of these big states are going to argue is they want the bailout of the state. This is the next big – if there is another package, and I'm not so sure it's going to be – first of all, there's not going to be an infrastructure package. That's just too complicated to negotiate. That's for you have to win a mandate. President Trump would to get the infrastructure. But right now, what this next package away from the PPP, what they're arguing for is bailouts of the states and bailouts at a level that is beyond what the virus brought. It's more of the pension bailouts and all this, and that's going to get to be this thing's going to be completely politicized by this afternoon's press conference, I think, press briefing.
Yeah, I mean, and this is, look, President Trump's been tweeting about this, saying that people are unemployed now because of crying Chuck and Nancy Pelosi, and the president has a point here. I mean, this the PPP funding is run out as far as on the small business loans.
They're taking the applications, but there's no money there.
Right. I mean, I'll give you, so Chris Hearn from Fountainhead, who we've had on here a couple of times, he has something in the nature, I think I have this number right, 25,000 loan applications in the queue, totaling about $5.5 billion. About 15% of that is from the state of Florida, which obviously key for 2020. So when you talk about the need to go and get this going, I mean, literally, that's just him, not any of the other 14 SBA-approved non-bank lenders. But, I mean, that's 25,000. Also got to do a couple tweaks. I think Marco Rubio and some others are working if they don't get a Fed waiver, SBA waiver to allow the quick buyback, as Chris talked about here. But, look, you literally have these small businesses ready to go in line, in queue, but we can't get them the money now until Nancy Pelosi and Crying Chuck get their rear ends back to work.
I wonder if you've seen the president's latest tweets this morning. 30 minutes ago, tweeting in all caps, "Liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan, liberate Virginia, and save your great Second Amendment. It is under siege." There's obviously this back and forth now between the governors and between the president, and that's obviously commanding a lot of thought processes on this. How does it sit, Jason, I wonder, and maybe Jack as well, if you're the vice president's team, the task force, and you've done the 30 days to slow the spread, we're at day 17, and we're getting liberate Minnesota, liberate Michigan. How do those two things play together?
Well, listen, I also think you got to be, just to jump in here, in the liberate thing.
Did I ask something I shouldn't?
Well, no, but I think you got to walk.
No, I was trying to think of a good response.
No, I think you've got to walk a thin line between those kind of voters in the middle. That we've seen the polling that it's not that everybody wants to get the country back to work. It's how you do that, right, and how you do it in an organized fashion. I think it's not that. Hey, we know many of the people that came out to the rallies the last couple of days, and that's fine. But now the president's put forward an organized plan that, if you listen to the War Room Pandemic, you see that kind of Memorial Day is the takeoff point. Bang, that's where you hit the inflection point, and there's an organized process through there.
Keep in mind that phase one, all of those, they still have the social distancing measures in place, the no crowd gatherings, the washing your hands, the telecommute to work if possible. So a lot of those are
I'm
still
not being
in
a
place.
critic, but that doesn't come across in those tweets.
No.
right?
Here's what I'm saying. That's gasoline on the fire, because this afternoon at the press briefing, let me say what's not going to happen. You're not going to have a nice critical path that's going to walk through a nice and here's Memorial. That's not going to happen. Right there. You get that's a shot across the bow. That's owning the libs, right? Because the media, I'm sure Jonathan Karl and Jake Tapper and Acosta in full meltdown. Before we go, let's talk about media. Let's talk about Rush Limbaugh. Do we have time?
Rush Limbaugh had a great story on Wednesday. President Trump, I guess at one point, had wanted to be a radio host or launch his own radio show, but he didn't want to compete with Rush Limbaugh, who, of course, El Rushbo, being the godfather of it all. We talked about him during the State of the Union and the importance he is to the broader U.S. conservative thought. Gave a quote to the New York Times, and Rush read a whole bunch of the story online. Here it is.
Quarters. Now, as multiple voices vie for the president's ear on the appropriate timeline for America's path to normalcy, Mr. Limbaugh is amplifying Mr. Trump's instinct for swiftness. And for the president, as well as much of his party, Mr. Limbaugh's affirmation remains a powerful motivator. Jason Miller, co-host of the War Room podcast, a former Trump communications advisor, said talk radio is still a powerhouse when it comes to Republican voters, and the president realizes how big a powerhouse Rush is. The takeaway here, folks, and we're very flattered, but the takeaway, the thing to really take away here.
And he keeps going after that. But nice little War Room shout out.
Well, and also the key thing about Trump that is interesting is that he didn't want to do a TV show. He was thinking about doing a radio show, because that's theater of the mind, right? The reason Rush is so powerful, Rush understands how powerful radio is as a medium.
And that's where he continues on with his quote saying that every conservative TV star wants to have the radio aspect because it is such a special relationship with listeners.
Okay, tomorrow at 10 o'clock, Descent into Hell Part 2, Xi's death sentence to Wuhan. It's already changed the Chinese Communist Party as they've tried to catch up with the death rate. We'll see you tomorrow at 10.